And so next up, podcast listeners, Biden gets visibly angry and yells in a microphone over accusations of reckless spending. President Joe Biden yelled angrily into the microphone last week over accusations about his reckless spending at the 29th AFL-CIO convention in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Biden attempted to debunk Republicans' claims that he is a big spender and contributing to a rising deficit. He said the administration will cut the deficit by another $1.6 trillion in 1 year. Yeah, sure. So Biden goes to the FL-CIO and he speaks to them at their annual convention. And we have a clip of what he said. You're going to laugh out loud when you hear it. And here is the clip.
Republicans like to portray me as some kind of big spender. We have spent a lot of money. But let's compare the facts. Under my predecessor, the deficit exploded, rising every single year, and all of the benefit going to the top 1%, basically. Under my plan, last year, we cut the deficit by $350 billion. Doing all this. You know, they talk about Biden wants to spend more on schools and all this. Guess what? He's going to create a deficit. Ladies and gentlemen, this year, by the end of the fiscal year, we will have cut the federal deficit by another $1.6 trillion in 1 year. 1 year. So when they come to you and talk about big spenders, let them know. Almost $2 trillion in deficit reduction. I don't want to hear any more of these lies about reckless spending. We're changing people's lives.
How do you like that yelling? We're changing people's lives. Let's talk about that because this is right in the sweet spot of this podcast, which is government is too big. Yeah, government is too big. Government's not supposed to change people's lives. It's not the goal of government. It's people that are supposed to change their lives and the lives of their families and their communities. It comes from the people up. It doesn't come from the government down, which is literally what Biden is saying. We're changing people's lives because of all the spending, and that makes it okay. And then he goes on and says, we cut the deficit. Yeah, so real quick question, ladies and gentlemen. Do you really feel like he's cut the deficit with the inflation that's occurring? Do you really feel like things are better because you can't afford gas, you can't afford food, you can't afford electricity, but Biden is changing people's lives? Of course he's changing their lives. He's making them miserable, absolutely miserable. So in the Daily Caller, they actually fact-checked Biden. What a surprise. The president has taken credit for the drop in deficit spending when in actuality, it has been drastically reduced due to the end of the emergency pandemic spending, according to factcheck.org. Shortly after he took office, the Congressional Budget Office estimated the deficit to drop by $874 billion in 2021. So it had nothing to do with Biden taking office. The budget deficit was already decreasing because we spent so much during the pandemic. It was emergency spending because the thought process was at the beginning of 2020, what? Thought process was that everybody was going to die from this pandemic, that literally it'd be mass death and perhaps the human race would be wiped out. I mean, certainly that was the narrative at the time. And so the government went and passed these emergency bills that involved incredible amounts of spending. And so then, Biden gets in, continues to spend like crazy unnecessarily, but for things unrelated to the pandemic. In other words, he wants to change people's lives by controlling everything that you do, making government do everything, of course, and then basically saying, well, I cut the budget deficit. What a bunch of nonsense. Do you really feel better off with the price of things?